Hyonsuk, a poor and overweight loner, wakes up one day to find himself in the body of a tall, handsome, and perfectly built man. He begins the story being bullied at school, acting like a dog but still getting beaten up. When he returns home, he tells his mother that he wants to transfer schools and ends up taking his frustration out on her. The next day at gym class, Hyonsuk continues to be bullied and gets slapped around by one of the guys. His mother suddenly appears and stands up to the bully, but this only embarrasses Hyonsuk. At home, his mother tells him that she went to the school to discuss transfer options and that he can transfer to a school in Seoul, but he will need to live on his own because she can't leave her job. He takes the opportunity to start fresh at a new school in Seoul, but things don't go quite as planned. When he meets a girl, he tries to be friendly, but she is creeped out by his behavior. The girl's boyfriend shows up and violently attacks Hyonsuk, causing the incident to be recorded and shared online. The next morning, Hyonsuk wakes up to find himself back in his old body, but there is another body lying next to him. He realizes that he is able to switch between the two bodies every time he sleeps. When he starts at his new school in the fashion design class, he is popular with the girls due to his good looks. However, he is seated next to the boy who beat him up, and his girlfriend is also in the class. Despite not being recognized, Hyonsuk becomes friends with the couple and begins to enjoy his new life. Jin is called out by a classmate, but he realizes that his girlfriend is also attracted to him. This causes him to become upset, but the teacher continues with the lesson. Later, at lunch, everyone is staring at Jin and Hannah introduces him to the different groups of students. She asks him why he chose to join the fashion design class, and it is revealed that with his poor academics, fashion design was the only class he was able to transfer into. Jin becomes tired because he spent the previous day testing out his new body and falls asleep. When he wakes up, he is back in his own body at home and realizes what happened. He tries to fall back asleep and manages to switch back into his other body when Hannah wakes him up at the end of class. Jin also gets a job at a convenience store to work nights, but when he goes in his other body to ask about the job, the owner is eager to hire him. However, Jin says the job is for a friend. The owner tries to change his mind when he sees Jin's other form, but Jin impresses him with his knowledge of cigarette brands from his experience as an errand boy. Jin starts working and some guys come into the store to buy cigarettes, but he recognizes them from his class and asks for their ID. He ends up turning them down. Jin joins Jin and his friends and realizes that his name is also Hyonsuk. He takes out his anger on him and beats him up again. They take a nude photo of Jin to prevent him from going to the police. The next day at school, Jin and his friends laugh about beating Jin up the previous night. Jin stands up to them and Jin prepares to fight him, but is stopped by another student named Jae. Jin breaks free and continues to attack Jin, but Jin has been beaten so much in the past that he can predict the punches and easily dodges them. Everyone is shocked when Jin's punch misses. Jin continues to swing, but Jin beats him with a single punch to the stomach. The news of the fight spreads to the other classes, particularly the vocal class and the architecture class, who decide they need to teach Jin a lesson. At night, Jin also notices a suspicious guy who ends up stealing something and running away. Jin chases after the suspicious guy and discovers that the guy was forced to steal by the bullies. The bullies then force Jin and the guy to fight each other, but they are saved by Bosco, who has a strong sense of justice and stands up to the bullies. The next day, Jin asks Hannah about Bosco and learns that he is the leader of the Burn Knuckle gang in the architecture class. The gang is joined by the Three Stooges, and Bosco sees Jin hanging out with them. Bosco approaches Jin and Jin thanks him for helping him, but realizes that the gratitude is for his other body. Bosco interprets Jin's words as meaning that Jin is friends with the Three Stooges and uses his shoulder knuckle grab to teach Jin a lesson. However, Jin manages to break free and everyone is shocked. Jin explains that it was a misunderstanding. Bosco's friend breaks up the altercation and reveals that Bosco would have lost if the fight continued. The Three Stooges are amazed by Jin's strength and ask to be his friend. They all go out for food together, and Jin is surprised to see Jin there. They end up smoothing things over with some drinks, and while the guys talk about a video from the previous night, Jin takes a big drink. Before the guy can show the video, Gene crushes the phone. He ends up passing out from the alcohol and wakes up in his other body. He tries to go back to sleep, but has a strange dream about his old bully. He realizes he can't switch bodies and rushes to find himself. Gene manages to make it back and explains that he was told to pick up his friend, so he ended up carrying his other body home. The next day, Gene runs into Joe, the guy who was also being bullied. Joe is confused about why Gene is being nice to him, and they end up having lunch together at Gene's house. Gene's mother comes to visit and sees him sleeping. Gene returns and explains that he is his son's roommate and that Gene works at night. Gene takes his mother out for coffee and Bosco happens to be there. Gene's mother feels comfortable with him and opens up to him. She gives Gene money for the coffee and Bosco becomes enraged when he sees Gene take the money after she leaves. Bosco confronts Gene and thinks Gene is a liar who is using his other self as an errand boy. Genie is confused, but Bosco attacks him. Seeing Bosco as another bully trying to take his money, Gene fights back and spins to hit Bosco in the face, knocking him out. He tells Gene he should train and tries doing some push-ups, but a beautiful girl comes in and he becomes embarrassed. The girl turns out to be nice and even buys Gene a drink for his workout. We meet a guy named Leon as he prepares to show off his new shoes, which are an exclusive brand, but he is overshadowed by Jay, who wears designer brands all over. Even Hannah is interested in Jay, but he doesn't really talk. The girls crowd around Gene as usual, but Leon can tell from Gene's shoes and bag that he is poor and has no fashion sense. They make a plan to expose Gene, but Jay overhears them. Later, Gene runs into a guy named Duke who is being bullied by guys from the vocal class. Gene stands up for Duke, but the teacher stops them from fighting. Gene offers Duke a hand, but he doesn't take it and walks away. Elsewhere, at a music studio, an audition is being held and both Duke and his bully, Vinny, are auditioning. Gene gets called up first and manages to impress the producer. The producer sees that Duke is the only one left, and Duke is sent away without getting the chance to perform. He tries to be friendly, but Duke thinks it's weird. At lunch, Duke is bullied by Vinny because he applied to sing at the festival. Vinny tells Duke that he would be an embarrassment to their class and slaps him around. After school, Gene beats Duke up again and rips up his notepad. Meanwhile, Gene also learns more about the festival from Anna, and she suggests that he could perform. Gene is on cleaning duty and thinks about what it would be like to perform. He ends up singing and Duke hears him from outside. Duke appears behind him and Gene is surprised. Duke asks Gene to be his partner to perform at the festival the next day, and Gene is amazed. Duke has already written lyrics and they practice. Joe is amazed at the two of them, but Duke tells Gene he needs to improve his technique. However, Duke also warns Gene not to over-practice because vocal cords are delicate. After school, Gene's throat is already a bit sore, but he finds that he can practice in his other body. The pretty girl shows up again and compliments Gene's voice. She gives him some lozenges for his throat and wishes him good luck in the next practice session. Duke reminds Gene not to practice too much, but Gene says he didn't, at least not in this body. Duke is amazed at Gene's improvement and thinks he must be a genius. After school, Duke and Joe are bullied by Vinny and his friends. They force Joe to hit Duke, but luckily Vinny gets called away. They all vouch for him and Bosco realizes he mistook Gene for a bad guy this whole time. Meanwhile, Vinny practices for the festival with his professionally written song and plans to debut as a singer. On the day of the festival, even the girl from the store comes to check it out. Gene chases the girl as she is leaving, but she has no idea who he is. She thinks Gene is trying to hit on her by pretending he knows her and is not impressed by the school, where everyone seems to judge people just by their appearance. Gene is shocked that she is so different from how she is at the store. She leaves and Gene goes after her, but is stopped by her bodyguard. The bodyguard is incredibly strong, but Gene manages to get free. The man delivers a devastating kick and Gene is brought to his knees. After Duke congratulates him, Hyonsuk becomes angry and punches Duke in the stomach. When Hyonsuk asks about Duke, the producer says he is talented but doesn't have the qualities necessary for a professional career. To everyone's surprise, after the performance, Hyonsuk also turns down the producer's offer. Their performance is shared online, and it is seen by the girl from the store. She recognizes Hyonsuk and realizes that he is singing the same song she heard at the store. She wonders how this is possible, and it is revealed that she also has a second body. This is where the video ends. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more recaps on all your favorite anime and shows. Thank you for watching.